So welcome everyone to our second webinar in as many weeks. So this one we'll be talking about how to make the most of your alumni network to meet the updated Gatsby benchmarks. And today we are joined by Mark Higgins, who is our head of membership here at Future First, and Vic Geary, who is a careers consultant who we work with quite regularly. So thank you, Mark and Vic, and I will let you carry on.
Excellent, thank you. Yeah, just to introduce myself, as Sarah said, I am the head of membership for Future First. So I work with our membership team and all of our schools across the country in terms of supporting that building of those alumni networks. And as I say, today we're going to talk through a few different bits, but predominantly talking about those changes or those upcoming changes to the Gatsby benchmarks. I'm hoping my slide will change. It has, excellent. So this is just a list of what we'll be covering today. Hopefully no surprises here and roughly what everybody is expecting us to go through. We'll talk a little bit about Future First, who we are, what we do, and just give you a bit of background information. I know that a lot of the people on the call today are already members of Future First, which is amazing, but there will be some people who aren't. So we'll just cover that briefly. And then Vic's going to give us a bit of a history of Gatsby and how we got to the stage that we're at now. And then also talking about what's coming next and how we can support you guys to achieve those Gatsby benchmarks and get one step ahead in terms of being ready for that statutory change that we know now is coming in September. Vic's also going to talk through the CEC employer standards, which I think is a really important thing to talk about and help understand where we are. We're going to talk a little bit about some tips around building a network, whether you are a member or not of Future First, but really how you can get that network up and running. What else is going on in the world of Future First? We have a few other bits and pieces coming up that I want to let you know about. And then we'll have plenty of time at the end for any questions or discussions about those benchmarks, how we're going to achieve them, any questions, or even just some best practice showing if there's anybody on the call who has a particular way of working that's been really successful for them. I think it'd be really valuable to share with the group too. Hopefully there's no questions. If there are any questions at any point, do feel free to unmute yourself and ask or stick your hand up. If you're not familiar with Zoom, there is a react button, hopefully in the bottom of your screen. I think it's normally a heart, but you can click on it and then you can select hand up and we can see that from here. And hopefully we'll be able to answer any questions you have. But at this point, I will quickly just hand you over to Vic. Oh, no, I won't. Sorry, Vic. One more slide. Apologies. I'll do this one, Vic. Who Future First are. So, as I mentioned, most of you, I think, are already existing members of Future First. So, hopefully, you know who we are. We are a social mobility charity. So, we're here to support young people to give them a chance to see a world outside of the world they're perhaps already surrounded by, and to connect them to relatable role models who have perhaps been to their school previously or live in the local area. We are the only UK charity, as far as I'm aware, that supports state schools in building alumni networks. We know giving young people access to alumni, to those role models, is super important and helps them to understand a career and careers paths and options in life, perhaps broader than the ones that are immediately visible to them. I think you can see our mission is on the screen, but we want to help every state school and college to build a thriving alumni network and have employer volunteers that equip young people with skills and confidence. That really is the nut of what we do. We always talk internally about this sort of phrase of you can't be what you can't see. And I think it's really important that we remember, and I'm sure we can all remember when we were young people, that you are in quite a bubble and you see your own world. And, you know, if both of your parents are teachers, the chances of you becoming a teacher are significantly higher than somebody who has no family who are teachers. And that comes down to a whole variety of different reasons, some really, really complicated and some as simple as you have somebody there you can talk to, you have somebody there you can ask questions to, you have a real idea of what that day-to-day job might look like. And what we want to do is put those role models in front of students so that they can ask the complicated questions about qualifications and careers, but also the simple questions about what the day looks like, what they get to do. Is it all computer-based? What qualifications do you need? Where do you get them from? These are all questions that a lot of us would have asked people along the way in our everyday life. It might have been, your parents, a friend of the family, aunties, uncles. We're just trying to broaden that network for young people and help them to see all of the different possibilities, so that those young people can be anything that they aspire to be and have an idea of what's actually out there. So that, in a nutshell, is who Future First are. Now I actually will pass you over to Vic, who's going to talk to you a little bit about the Gatsby timeline.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Mark. Hi, everyone. My internet connection is telling me that it's unstable, but can you hear me okay? Super. So hi, I'm Vic. I'm an independent careers consultant, among many other things, and I work quite a lot with Future First. You might have seen me kind of pop up writing blogs and things for Future First. But what I'm going to do today is just initially take you through, for those of you who aren't familiar, taking you through a little bit of a crash course through the Gatsby Benchmarks timeline, so how we kind of got here. We will be sending the slides out. They'll probably come from Sarah Jane, who started the call. So please don't worry about having to write everything down. But sometimes it's useful to just know how we got to where we are, so you've got a bit of context. So I'm not going to read everything on here, but just to give you an idea, in the distant past, pre sort of 2011, 2010, we did have an all-age careers service, those utopian days, called Connections, which some of you might know of or have even worked in. But then when Connections ceased to be a universal career service across England, the Education Act in 2011 gave schools the responsibility of making sure there was access to career guidance support. So that's kind of when the responsibility really transferred over to individual schools. 2014 was when the Gatsby Foundation first published the Good Career Guidance Report, which kind of gathered evidence from across the world to find the 8 Gatsby benchmarks that we now know and love, as a symbol of kind of the best practice that they'd identified from across career services across the world. Those benchmarks were piloted in the northeast of England from 2015 to 17, and during that time there were various other kind of pilot projects, one of which I was involved in Greater Manchester, but there was other sort of pockets of practice going on with local authorities trying to join things up a little bit. But the pilot was hugely successful in the northeast, and then in 2018 the Gatsby benchmarks were adopted as statutory guidance. From that point, there were various kind of iterations and various milestones that we all had to hit. I was a careers leader in 2017, so when it became a thing. By September 2018, that was when everyone had to publish details of their career programme and have a named careers leader, which some of you probably will be. And then 2020 was the point where schools were told that that was where we had to get that to that point where every young person had 7 encounters with with employers, in every year from year 7 to 13. That was kind of the milestone that we had to hit for the career strategy that was published in 2017. Fast forward to 2024, 90% of schools are using the Gatsby benchmarks. And that was when, at the back end of last year, was when Gatsby, the Good Career Guidance Next 10 Years was published with the updated Gatsby benchmarks, which is what we're going to cover next, because by September of this year now, in 2025, those updated Gatsby benchmarks become statutory, and that is what schools will then be judged against. So let's delve a little bit into what these look like. Again, these are going to be sent out to you, so you'll be able to use them. And I have included what is hopefully a useful quote. So for each benchmark, I've included a quote that should be a clincher for those of you who are trying to convince SLT to invest more, to give you more time, to prioritise careers. These are hopefully the little nuggets that will help you to get those changes over the line. So for Gatsby Benchmark 1, as having a stable careers programme, the new report, the next 10 years, emphasised the importance of schools building a structured and meaningful relationship with alumni as part of that stable careers programme. So it's part and parcel, and that includes including careers as part of teacher CPD. So that's something that is definitely needs to be on your radar. Gatsby Benchmark 2, learning from career and labour market information. So the report makes it really clear that all young people, including those with SEND, and their parents and teachers need to have access to up-to-date information. So you can't get more up-to-date than somebody who's currently working in a particular industry. Then Gatsby Benchmark 3, addressing the needs of each student. There is now an emphasis on using data, even more of an emphasis on using data to measure the impact of alumni engagement. So that means that it needs to be recorded and analysed. So below there, I've got some little useful quotes that you can use that are directly from the report. But I'm just going to hand over, before we move on to the next set of benchmarks, to Mark for him to highlight how Future First can help with each of those.
Yeah, thanks, Faye. So obviously at Future First, we are really excited about these changes that are coming to the Gatsby benchmarks. We know from years and years of experience the impact that alumni have on young people in schools. And we're really hopeful that this will give some schools a kick in the right direction and celebrate those schools who are well ahead on this front and already engaging those alumni. I do want to talk a little bit about how to do some of these things practically. Whilst appreciating that some people on this call are Future First members and some aren't, I think there's some really useful advice that we can share here from all the experience we have in engaging with alumni. And I think that if I take us back to Gatsby benchmark number 1, which is that useful quote on the left of schools or colleges should develop strategies to engage alumni as part of a wider approach for employment and community involvement. This is something that we would encourage all schools, obviously, to do. Now, you can do this in any way you want. Those of you who are members of Future First will hopefully be using the Future First Hub as a home for all of your alumni, our social media style website where you'll be able to put those people and contact them. And some of you won't be members of Future First and will be using a spreadsheet, a list, multiple sheets, an email list, whatever it might be. I think the really important thing here is that we need to engage those alumni in events in school. And I think there's a few things that we can point out and point to that will make this easier. We'll talk a lot through this call about regular communications with alumni. It is obviously important to stay in touch with your alumni, but equally to strike that balance between bombarding them and keeping them well informed. We would always recommend to schools that a once a term newsletter with information about what's coming up in the next term is usually sufficient for most schools. Now, some schools will have a super engaged network that needs more than that. And some schools might feel like getting the termly events out is a bit too much of a burden, or there might be a term where they struggle. But really, that consistency is super important. If people know that those opportunities will come up at the end of one term, ready for the next, they can make their adjustments to either book a day off work, perhaps, or use their voluntary days at work. And those are the things that we really want to encourage our alumni to be doing and to be thinking about. I also want to just touch on the community part of this. Again, those on the Future First Hub can add friends of the school to their network if you're not. On the Hub, I would still recommend keeping that information somewhere. There will be people who engage with the school who perhaps aren't alumni. They might be parents of existing students. They might be governors. They might be local politicians or people who are just invested in their local area and their community. They can be super valuable too. I often talk to schools about this idea of the gold standard of role models put in front of a young person is somebody who has literally sat in that seat before, has sat physically in that seat 10, 15, 20 years ago, maybe even been taught by the same teacher in the same classroom. And that is an incredibly relatable thing. Equally, though, a pretty good stand-in at that point is somebody from the local area, somebody who perhaps went to the school just down the road or went to a school a couple of buses away, but is super invested in making those opportunities available to your young people. We talk about them as alumni, and it's about volunteers that we take to schools. Whatever that terminology is, I would encourage you to start thinking about that wider network and not just alumni, but also start thinking about that comms plan for those people. Sounds like a big challenge, but in reality, we are talking about 3-4 emails a year. And also making sure that when you send those emails, there's a really clear ask. Let's be really clear about what we want from our alumni and what we want them to do. Students seeking advice from alumni. I think that second one, all pupils, parents, carers, teachers and staff who support pupils should have access to good quality, up-to-date information about the labour market. That's a real challenge. the labour market is obviously huge, and all the different jobs and all the different worlds. It sounds like an almost an impossibility, but again, this is somewhere where your alumni can help. You know, if you record when you collect your alumni information, wherever it might be, you record what job they do, what qualifications they have, what interests they might have. These are people that either you can reach out to and ask questions. I always joke when I do these calls with schools and talk about the fact that and I genuinely don't know the difference between a solicitor and a barrister. They always seemed like the same job to me. I think one has more to do with courts and one has more to do with paperwork, but I'm not even sure which one. But obviously, if as a careers lead you have this list of contacts that you can use, that's also a great way to use your alumni to send them questions about their careers, to ask them for that latest information about what qualification might be needed in that job, or what that industry looks like, or what direction that industry is going in. And then finally, we talk about gathering evidence of impact. Obviously, it's really, really important that you centralize this somewhere. If you're a Future First Hub user, it exists in the hub. We can show you how many events you've run and who's come to them. If you're outside of the hub, you can still collect that information. It's really important to be able to demonstrate that impact. And that can be, you know, all the way from the number of events, the number of people, the number of volunteers, the number of alumni, but also could be the number of interactions and whether there's a facility that you can put in place that you're comfortable with to allow students to interact with volunteers and alumni. It might be that those alumni come to school for a careers fair, something like that, where students could ask questions. It might be on an online platform. It might be anywhere that you think is suitable. But again, just bear in mind that at the end of the year, you're going to have to report that number. So you need somewhere where you have that evidence, you have that clear information, you know, the date they came in, who they were, what they did, how long they spent at the school. It also is a really great way to touch on Vic's point earlier when we talk about convincing senior leaders and budgetary spend to be able to show value. You know, if you can get 10 hours of volunteering from your alumni, that has a financial value to the school and hopefully can really make a solid argument for investing in programs like the alumni and giving more time to staff like you guys to spend on that alumni if you can get that time back by bringing volunteers into the school. Vic, do you want to run through the next ones?
Thanks, Mark. Yes, well. Lovely. So here we've got benchmark 4 and benchmark 5. So Gatsby benchmark 4, linking curriculum learning to careers. The big key update that I think was actually really significant that I don't think has been quite made enough of really in kind of news articles about this is that careers education should be embedded throughout the curriculum, not confined to isolated events and no longer only an explicit requirement in STEM subjects. And I think as careers leaders, I think most careers leaders that I've come across, and myself when I was one, I took linking curriculum learning to careers as across the curriculum. But in terms of my experience of Ofsted inspectors and sometimes SLT who'd read the small print, because it explicitly only said in STEM subjects, sometimes it was really, really difficult to get buy-in to do things across the curriculum in all curriculum subjects, which did sometimes limit the kind of rationale for bringing in, you know, a brilliant former student who's now working in the creative industries, for instance, or, you know, doing a job that's kind of really brilliantly linked to English. It was a bit more difficult to kind of get that rationale, but now it really is very explicit that it has to be across all curriculum subjects. And then Gatsby Benchmark 5, encounters with employees. Obviously, this is kind of where alumni always kind of really sat, but it's now super clear. They use the phrase relatable role models. And as Mark said earlier, that phrase, you can't be what you can't see. You know, you need to put those role models in front of them, but they need to be relatable. If you just put a top barrister in front of them, I'll explain what that is later, Mark. If you just put a top, I'll give careers advice, don't worry. If you just put a top barrister in front of them, that's great. But actually, if that person, it might be that person is from a similar background to them. But if that's not made explicit, and if it's not somebody that they see as someone who once sat in their seat, it can actually make that seem further away and actually less appealing, and sometimes it can be counterproductive. So having this guidance in there, it's stressed in there, that there is an expectation that every student should have multiple opportunities for encounters with employers and employees throughout secondary and tertiary education. So the onus now is also on colleges and independent training providers, ITPs, to adhere to this as well. There's a real opportunity here for careers leaders to get really creative. And Mark, I'll just hand over to you briefly again to do the same and just highlight how Future First can help.
Yeah, thanks, Vic. I think there's a couple of things here. Again, I'm going to talk about this from an alumni perspective, somewhat unsurprisingly, and I'm sure there's loads of other bits and pieces that we can think about how we do these things. But when we look at 4 and 5, I think it becomes really obvious the role that alumni can play in this. And we talk about careers advice throughout the curriculum. Obviously, one great way to embed that is to bring in those role models throughout the curriculum. And once you have your database or your Future First hub full of all of your volunteers and your alumni, we need to really be thinking about how we make it as easy as possible for teachers who aren't engaged in this every day to reach out to those people and bring them into school. Now, that could be as simple as asking the teachers and reminding them to send you an email for you to send out once a term to your, remind them to put their events on. Or for the Future First Hub users out there, you can just add them as staff and they'll be able to create their own events. And we're always more than happy to show more and more people how to do that within your network. So if you want to do that, if you want to get in touch with us and ask, we're more than happy to sit down and train another handful of teachers at school as to how they can go and seek their own volunteers through the hub. But obviously bringing those people in again is super important, and we need to make it as easy as possible for staff to engage with those volunteers. So again, I would always recommend when you have volunteers and alumni in school, if you can, a really easy tip that really can make a difference is bringing those alumni or volunteers into the staff room during the breaks or lunchtime. It just raises awareness of what's going on in the school. Bringing in, especially if you've got popular alumni, bringing those back into a staff room can be a nice little boost for teachers, and they might come over and go, "Oh, what are you doing here? Why are you about?" And that can be a great way for you to sort of lever in this idea of bringing alumni into lessons more frequently and giving other members of staff access and the ability to do that. And we talk about meaningful encounters with employers. Well, those of you who are Future First members, again, you'll have access to our employer network, and we'll probably be reaching out to you with events and all sorts of different things that are going on. But if you're not, your alumni are a really great resource. The vast majority of them will be in work somewhere. They will have employers, might run companies, they might be senior leaders at organizations. You can reach out to them and ask them for their support. If they've already decided to join your alumni network, they've already gone online and joined or submitted the details to you for your spreadsheets, they are willing to help. And sending them an email again with a really clear ask, we are looking for meaningful engagement. Can any of you host some of our students for a day, a couple of days? And thinking about how you standardize that. We have ways of doing that we're always happy to share around things like insight days, and we can always get in the middle of that relationship if you want us to facilitate it and make it work. All these options are out there, but we're more than happy to try to support you in doing that. It's really, really important, and we also absolutely understand how challenging that particular Gatsby benchmark will be. But again, your alumni are there, they're willing to help, they're looking for ways to help. And I would hope that most of them would be more than happy to facilitate some sort of engagement in terms of an employer engagement event for your current students. Vic?
Last two.
Oh, sorry, I realise I've got the buttons again, haven't I?
You have got the buttons, yeah. So, in terms of Gatsby benchmarks 6 and 7, so experiences of workplaces, again, this is one where kind of the alumni who are, out in the world of work are obviously really handy. Now, the update is that schools are encouraged to provide more tailored, personalised career advice and support, including support to those who have SEN, to allow them parity of access. So at this point, obviously alumni can, obviously there's no there's no replacement for qualified careers advice, and this mustn't be seen as a replacement for that, because Gatsby Benchmark 8 is personalised guidance, and that needs to be from a level 6 qualified careers professional. But where it says tailored personalised career advice and support, part of that, and if we look again at the kind of multiple experiences and multiple exposure to employers and employees, alumni, you might just find somebody who's doing that little niche job, and it might be that you find someone who has experienced the same learning difficulty or neurodiversity that a current student might be struggling with at the moment. It's not just about matching people on careers. Sometimes it's about matching people on experiences and on challenges. So that's another way that you can kind of look at this. And then from encounters with further and higher education, your immediate alumni might not yet be in work, but they might be at a local training provider, or they might be at a local higher education provider. And the same is true of those kind of, you can't be what you can't see. The same is true of education routes as it is for work. It might be that you can use your alumni to showcase those diverse career pathways. So it can be just as valuable to have somebody who's, left school 10 years ago, took a bit of a wiggly route. There's so much in there that can be valuable to young people, but it can just be the same as useful to have alumni who are quite recent leavers to come back in, especially if they're people, like Mark said, the popular ones who people will recognise, to be able to show that actually they've moved on and they've done something different, and they remember them in their school uniform, and now look at them, they're in work boots doing an apprenticeship, or they're, in a suit doing something, or they're studying something that sounds really exciting. And it's important as well that you can use a diversity, which is important to build your network, that you've got a diversity of role models, that you've not just got people who are from the local sixth form coming in. You need to find the ones who have gone off and done something a little bit different, to kind of showcase, as it says, those first-hand insights. Is there anything for you to add on there, Mark?
No, I think just to echo those same points around Gatsby Benchmark 6, that this advice obviously needs to come from qualified people, but your alumni can be a real asset to you guys to find that information as well. I think we think about alumni a lot as role models, and that is super important. And I think we've talked about that with several of the other benchmarks, but they're also a great resource for the school to go and find out that information, like you say, about that odd job that you don't know anything about, in my case, the legal world. But any of those jobs where perhaps you lack that information or lack that knowledge, or have a specific question from a young person about an area of that role, you can reach out to those alumni. And if you make sure when you're collecting that data initially, you collect the right things, you think about their jobs, their experiences, their qualifications, their routes, maybe collecting information about their any diversity information about things like neurodiversity. They're really great for being able to ask those questions. And the only other thing for benchmark 7 that I would add is it's really, really important to be broad here. And I think when we think about bringing alumni into school, it gets tempting to think about successful alumni. But I think we all have different qualifications as to what that means. And I've definitely seen people, we've all come across people who think, well, your highest earning 10% of your alumni are the most successful ones, or your happiest, or your the ones who work in the third sector, or the ones who have gone on to share their knowledge or become academics. Everyone has this pre-built-in sort of decision about what success might look like and who the alumni are that you want to put in front of people. But the whole point of having that alumni network is to allow all of the young people at school to find a role model that they find relatable. And actually, there's no more value to those young people, meeting 5 doctors, but actually meeting 5 super diverse people in all different walks of life. Maybe someone who is out of work but volunteering in something they really are passionate about. That's just as valuable for those young people to understand how that works and how life is for those people too. So I guess just to check our own qualifications on that word, and how we choose those volunteers and make sure that we are being broad. That's it from me, Vic.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so this is just an update on something that is related to the Gatsby benchmarks that I just thought, thinking from a kind of careers leader perspective, that it might be useful to share. So, the Careers and Enterprise Company, which runs the career hubs that many of you will be members of, the Careers Enterprise Company has a set of employer standards, and there's about 400 employers signed up as the kind of first tier of employers through the Careers and Enterprise Company, but many, many more kind of in the sort of lower tiers, just engaged slightly less, but still really keen. And these employer standards were a year old in around November, and there's been a report published called From Outreach to Intake, which you can find if you just search online for it. And the report gives really sound reasons for employers to engage with schools. So the reason that I wanted to put this in here was that so that you can be reassured that there really is an appetite from employers to work with you and with your students, and kind of just some of the reasons that were kind of cited in there, and little stats that you could use. If you're struggling to engage SLT, and they're, sometimes they're nervous of kind of going out to employers, thinking, well, are they going to want to engage with the school? There's things here that might be useful for you. So the things that came out were closing of skills gaps. So engaging with schools has been proven to help address skills gaps that companies are experiencing. Diversifying their workforce. It's been shown 77% of employers who target their work to underrepresented groups. So that works particularly if you're working in a school with a high proportion of free school meals, but not exclusively, obviously, that their outreach is helping to improve their workplace diversity because people are seeing themselves reflected in the workforce, and are therefore more likely to apply. Encouraging applications. So a really high proportion of employers say that their work with schools and colleges is encouraging young people to apply. So that's obviously addressing, your successful outcomes, for apprenticeships, or, obviously working in a college. If you're working at that higher end, then some students might be going straight into jobs. Parental engagement, which is obviously, again, mirrored in the Gatsby benchmarks, that there is much more of an emphasis now on parental engagement, that only a small number of employers are currently engaging parents, but of them, over 90% say that that's helping to develop their talent pipelines. So there might be a win-win there. If you're working through your careers hub, find out who those employers are who are super engaged and who are wanting to engage with schools. If you can offer an opportunity as a school for that employer to engage with parents as well, then actually from their kind of corporate social responsibility, their social impact arm will be even more enthused about working with your school, because you're actually showing a way that they can address their targets as well. They can hit their objectives for kind of social mobility and engagement, while you're hitting your objectives for engaging with employers, but also your now kind of obligation to ensure that you're engaging with parents as well. So there's a real win-win-win for everybody there. And then the final one that came out of the report was about teacher CPD. So a lot of employers engaging with teachers say their work is helping to develop new talent pipelines. So it might be that, like Mark mentioned, it might not be necessarily that you get alumni in initially if there isn't an opportunity to get into the curriculum or for a kind of careers day. It might be actually that you find a way to engage with some of your alumni to develop teacher CPD, to increase teachers' awareness of careers and jobs that are available in the local labour market, so that they can kind of, just be equipped to drop those things into conversations, drop those things into lesson plans, to kind of really truly embed a whole school approach.
Amazing. So I think I want to sort of bring us towards the end of today's conversation by talking a little bit about immediately what we need to do. So obviously, we now know that the recommendations that came out for the Gatsby changes are going to become statutory guidance in September. I think there might be a few tweaks that might happen, but we know broadly that's going to be what happens and what we're expecting. I think it's really important to think about what we do between now and then to get ahead. So I would suggest these are the things that I'd start thinking about now, if I was in a position of being a careers leader at a school. I think you need to start about thinking about building that alumni network if you don't already have one. If you already have some existing people, I think you need to think about growing it and how you keep it growing. Um, our big tip here, and I don't think it's any surprise, is one of the things that we always tell schools to ask alumni to do is to share the alumni network and to encourage people they know who they went to school with to join and become part of that network. If you think about probably on all of our phones somewhere, there's a WhatsApp group for people perhaps we went to school with, or a messenger group, or we have a Facebook group somewhere. There's some way that we'd be able to get in touch with a handful of those people each. If you think about your network as of 50 people, perhaps initially, then that's how that can grow. But also, we talked last week about social media and how we can use our social media to sort of engage with our alumni. If you didn't see that, I'm sure that Sarah Jane will be able to share it. But broadly, we should be thinking about getting it started. Once you've got that first 20, 30 people, they can grow themselves if you encourage them and give them clear instructions. If you send them a link to say, click here and sign up for our Future First Network, they can. If you send them a link that says, email Mr. Higgins to say that you want to be added to the alumni mailing list, then they can. I think you need to be really clear with alumni about what you need from them. When we have volunteers and alumni engaging with schools, clarity is really important. But also think about varied ways in which they can engage. Not everybody will be able to come to the school and give up a day of their time, but they might be able to share their story. They might be able to pre-record a video for you. They might be able to post on your social media about their experience of their career and that wiggly journey that Vic talked about earlier. They might be able just to offer a 10-minute phone call where you might be able to get 2 or 3 students together who you know are particularly interested in that career, and you can jump on a Zoom call with them. It really is about trying to find different ways in which those people can engage, but also being responsive to them. They will ask you questions. They will come back to you. If you think about what would keep you engaged with your alumni networks from our respective schools, they will ask questions, and adding some fun into these things never hurts. Whether it's adding a place they can share photos, they share memories, pass messages back to teachers they perhaps, who they got taught by at the school who made a big difference. Really focus on that fun element. And I guess finally, or the last couple are around that career breadth, which I think I spoke about earlier, but also allowing students space to meaningfully engage. When you do get alumni into school, obviously a talk is great, an assembly is brilliant. It puts that role model in front of them. But actually, if there's an assembly happening and the barrister is at the front, I still might have a couple of questions at the end. Leaving some space for students to actually go and engage and ask those questions, write them down and get an answer back, or whatever it might be, can be fairly simple but really impactful in terms of allowing that engagement to happen and that role model to have that impact, I guess. So what next for Future First? We do have a few upcoming things that you might be interested in being involved in. We'll have some more CPD events coming up. There's some information there. You can find out where our CPD calendar is, but also I'm sure that Sarah Jane will let you know when our next CPD events are. We have our careers conference happening at the start of July. So that's all focused around alumni and developing a thriving alumni community. Hopefully that's no surprise, but you can get tickets at that link there. And I think lastly, if you are an existing member or not, and you have a question, if you're an existing member and you feel like perhaps you haven't stolen a march just yet and you want to have a quick meeting with us and chat about a plan, then let me know. If you're not a member but you want to have a conversation, ask for some more thoughts or help me, talk about joining or whatever it might be, my email address is there. There's one thing I love is talking about alumni. So please do feel free to get in touch, ask a question, whatever it might be. I think at this point, we're going to open it up to any questions that anybody might have. If you do have a question, you can raise your hand and ask, or you can pop it in the chat. I'm sure I can find my way to the chat to see those questions. I'll just wait a minute just in case anybody's got any questions. Otherwise, Vic will must have done an astonishing job. You never know.
Yeah, and if people want, they can also unmute themselves if they'd rather ask than type.
Oh,
There we
we have
go.
a
They're
couple of
coming. They're
questions.
coming.
There we go. Do keep typing if you're still going, and we'll work our way through all of them.
So
Yeah, absolutely.
do you have any templates to help get started with alumni engagement?
Yeah, we absolutely do, Liz, and we're more than happy to share those. I will try to get some to Sarah Jane to post on our social media over the next few weeks because I think that's a really practical thing that we can share. Some examples of what those newsletters might look like that we encourage people to send out to schools. My advice, and Sarah Jane, you're our comms person, so tell me if I'm wrong, but my advice with these things is to keep them short, to be really specific, to be clear in what you need and what your ask is. We all get emails that require the dreaded scroll and read. And I imagine most of us probably mark those as unread a couple of times or put them in our action folder and come back to them another day. Keep it short, keep it snappy, and be really concise would be my advice. But yeah, we can absolutely share some stuff through our social media channels over the next few weeks. That's no problem at all.
Yeah, I'm a big
And
fan
then,
of one email, one message kind of thing.
yeah.
Yeah,
Uh,
definitely.
okay, so the next question is, I'm worried about alumni coming in and not really knowing how to engage with our students. How can we make sure they are prepared?
Yeah, absolutely. It's an absolutely fair point, and we obviously we bring alumni into schools all of the time and volunteers, and we are really clear with them ahead of time. We just organise a short call like this. I think our ones last typically about 15, 20 minutes. We don't want to ask too much, but we're really clear and we get to know those volunteers, and we're just very clear again about that expectation. Um, we in those briefings, and I would suggest you do the same. However, you bring volunteers into school, I'm sure your school has policies for this, but we always talk them through safeguarding too, because people who don't go to schools very often don't really understand what a school looks like. A school now is very different to a school a few years ago, and the idea that when I went to school, I think somebody could have just walked in, to be honest. But now you can't go anywhere without the right coloured lanyards, and you might get chat. All of these things we like to cover, but also I would suggest that it's really important that we're there to facilitate as people who work with students every day, and help to smooth that conversation through. So hopefully those are some things that you can definitely do to give them a bit more of a clue. And
Mm.
obviously, once you've used the volunteer once, hopefully they'll come back more times and they'll become more and more confident in that engagement. But I would say if you have worries about volunteers and you're not sure they're the most confident, starting with one-to-one conversations, a careers fair, something like that is always better than going straight to things like assemblies, because they can be quite nerve-wracking if you've not done one before.
Mm.
250 teenagers judging you can be some people's idea of their worst day.
Yeah, I've just got one thing to add to that because Georgie's got another question as well. In terms of sort of helping them to know how to engage with the students, I think everything Mark said, absolutely, I agree with. I think the other thing is knowing yourself. What is it that you want the students to take away from that session? So if you think about it exactly like you would, a lesson or a workshop that you're delivering yourself or that a teacher's delivering, what is it? If you know what it is that you want the students to get out of it, you communicate that to the person who's presenting or who's running it or who's delivering something, then they will understand what the objective is rather than just saying, oh, just come in and talk about your career journey. It's like if you give them the context and you know what it is that you want to happen and you communicate that really clearly, that can make sure that you get the best result. I think there's another follow-on question from the
Yep, there
same.
is a follow-on question. I have a few alumni who volunteer for every event I host. How should I keep them engaged and know I appreciate them whilst also opening it up to other alumni?
Yeah, absolutely. The honest truth is, I love these people. Every school has a few of them, and it's great to know that we're not the only people who meet the same people regularly. It is really important to let them know, and how do you let them know that you appreciate them? I was just telling them is a pretty good start without being facetious. I think having a conversation, helping them to understand the impact they're having, can really be important. But when you meet those volunteers time after time, taking some time, and I'm not saying find an hour to have a conversation with them. I'm saying whilst you're walking from one place to another in school, try to get an understanding of what motivates them in terms of their volunteering. People volunteer for different reasons. Because they want to make a difference, because they feel like they should, they're curious and want to come back to the school and see what's going on. They want that full heart feeling of knowing they're doing some good in their local area, whatever it is. Try to really understand that. And then don't be afraid to have conversations with them about, hey, I think you'd be really great at this event, and encourage them to come to the events that you want them to. But equally, if you've hopefully built that relationship and you've met that person a dozen times, having a conversation of, oh, I think you've met these young people before. I have another volunteer who's keen to come in who I'm going to invite to this event if that's okay, is actually quite easy to have. It's all about relationship building. And I think that's the great thing is these repeated volunteers do give you that opportunity to build a real relationship with them. So I would take that opportunity and take a second to understand their motives and what they're interested in and what they're passionate about. And hopefully it'll be a win-win. The school will get what they need and they volunteer will too.
Mm. I definitely think as well, in terms of keeping them engaged and letting them know that you appreciate them, that evaluation data that you are now obliged to collect and report upon for the Gatsby benchmarks, you create a version to share with the alumni. At the end, do an end of year report. You need to do it anyway to be able to be compliant with the benchmarks and for SLT and for Ofsted. Make a slightly snazzier version, a thank you version. Invite the your key ones in. Give them breakfast. Do it as a presentation. Share the impact of what they've done, and then encourage them to share with a colleague, for instance, to show how rewarding it is and what an impact it has, or a friend of theirs who works for a different organization to get a new perspective, and use those engaged people to build your network further. I would say, and use that data, show them the impact that they're having. That shows your appreciation as well, I'd say.
That's great. Are there any more questions that anyone has? Don't think so.
You're welcome. Just have a little thank you.
Well, I would like to say thank you to both of you, Mark and Vic. That was really interesting and useful. And just a reminder to everyone that we will share the recording of the webinar and the slides as well. So you can have those and rewatch them or share them. By all means, do share them. And we'll also send you a feedback form. And if there is anything you'd like us to cover in future webinars, please let us know. Ultimately, we're here to serve you. So if there's any questions, anything that you have, just let us know, and we'll be more than happy to put something on that answers that. Any final words from either Vic or Mark?
No, just
Thanks
thank
for
you all for
listening.
your time. And as I say, if you have questions, if anything pops up later, let us know. Yeah,
Yeah,
always happy to
absolutely.
help.
That's great. Thank you both. Bye.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.